Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Stranger Things Season 5 Episodes 5, 6 and 7, or Volume 2 of Season 5, or Part 2, whatever you want to call it. Spoilers for the episodes, of course. We have just the finale left in about a week's time, which I'm looking forward to. I kind of love that they've spread them out like this because it's great having a little bit more to anticipate and have a chance for everyone to stop and sort of think about it and talk about it a little bit. But anyway, I've done my whole spiel on why weekly is better before. 3 episodes, lots of big stuff happened, lots of emotional sequences, some with characters that I didn't think they could make me care about the emotional payoffs to, but they did, so fair play. Is there faults to still mention? Yeah, there is. Not everything's perfect. There's a couple of characters or story beats that are a little tedious. I don't want to just, complain about Callie, but everyone complained about her episode back in season 2, and I think everything with her in these couple of episodes are kind of the parts that I liked the least, just because it felt like she was a bit of a downer, and it felt like she was trying to convince Elle of something that was like, nah, this just feels like something we're throwing in to try and make Elle think she has to do what Hopper was going to do with the sacrifice side of things before, and every single time she brought it up, I'm just like, shut up, why are we introducing this? So that annoyed me, right? Callie's whole thing she's trying to push in these episodes about having to end the possibility of them ever continuing the experiments by taking themselves out of the picture. Right, not a fan of that. It feels kind of tacked on, and I don't believe for a second that Elle's going to go through with it. And if anything, there's a big scene in episode 7 that I think is going to be one of the key inspirations for Elle doing the right thing and overcoming the fears of what might happen in the future. But more on that in a bit. But other than a couple other clunky exposition scenes, which this show has always kind of had, to be fair. Although this time it's not the Max and Holly plot. The Max and Holly plot was mostly really, really, really good. All the stuff in the Camazotz, they called it, inside Vecna's mind. All that stuff pretty much was great this time because we had the exposition out the way, we had the backstory out the way, and we got a lot of great moments out of it this time in a variety of different ways. And we also get payoffs to a lot of things in there, so that was great. But once again, it was actually Callie's stuff that felt like she was just sitting and explaining backstory to Elle at one point in episode 5, and it's just the dullest way to, just cut to the scene and show it when she starts talking. That'd be a little bit better, but it just, it was kind of similar to, it wasn't as long as the Max telling the story of how she'd been in this place for a long time back in episode 4, but it was kind of verging into the same clunky territory for me, with her just saying, oh yeah, they killed my friends, they arrested me, they shaved my head, which, to be fair, I think that's a good detail, the shaving of the head, because one, it's something that we've seen them do to Elle multiple times, so it's consistent and it tracks, and they've usually been pretty good with the sort of lore things being consistent on the show and the rules of the lore. But also, I think for Callie in particular, her hair was such a statement. To, just in the sense that she put a lot of effort into it. She had this very, kind of showy hairstyle. She clearly cared about her hair and making a bit of an identity statement with it. So for them to shave that off and her looking, sad as they do, it felt a lot more impactful than any other character, because honestly, their hair was kind of the thing I remembered the most about her on a couple of key scenes. So it was effective in that, right? But just to get what she talks about out the way, this idea that they're trying to recreate the experiments from before, whether they're trying to infect new pregnant women with the blood of Callie, but it's not working. They need Elle's blood because Elle's blood is the most pure, it's the most like Vecna's or whatever, and that's what the goal is. And Callie's all, oh, we have to, there's no bright future for us, there's no hope. Any ideas that we can live a normal life after this is a fantasy, so we have to go into the lava like the end of T2 to make sure the apocalypse doesn't happen. That's not how she phrases it, of course, but that's except it made sense in Terminator when the Terminator made that point. Here it kind of felt very, very jaded and cynical, and just kind of shoehorned in to give Elle a bit of new conflict, I guess, get into the last episode. because honestly, all the interesting character stuff is elsewhere for the most part. I mean, Elle's pretty badass in an action scene. There's a moment at the start of episode 6 where she's having to like shield them from debris that's all flying towards them, and I'll get to the context of that scene a bit later. But even just the physical act of her like making all these, this debris break up in front of them and save them was a pretty cool moment. But I wouldn't say her plotline with Hopper this season has been the highlight per se. It's not been terrible or anything. It's just been kind of, it's fine. It's there. It's kind of amazing how uncentral I feel like her story is to the show in its final season, given how much everything revolved around her back in season 1. And, it's just kind of wavered, from like the A plot to the B plot or whatever, like throughout, of course. She was very heavily diminished in season 2 by being kept separate from everyone. And it's been a little bit more here or there since. But anyway, that's more of an observation than a complaint per se. It's just an interesting thought more than anything. But yeah, lots to talk about here in these episodes. And I was largely... I've basically got my complaints out of the way, right? The Callie stuff is the stuff that I did not like. Everything else, pretty much, I liked to outright loved. Some of the, like, the bombshells, if you will, that they drop for the lore towards the end of episode 5 into the start of 6 are really cool. And I was really into them, and it's not really where I saw it going, and what's so good about it is that it started teasing certain elements that made me think about certain things, and I didn't guess anything. This wasn't like the first volume of the season where I guessed a couple of things. I didn't guess anything, but I did have one thought that kind of tied into what they revealed a little bit after the fact. Mainly, when we see Holly finally wake up at the start of 7, I was like, this doesn't look like the Upside Down. Like, I had that thought. Like, is that like an accident? Like, is that a different part of the Upside Down? But it, the thought it does not look like the Upside Down was absolutely what was going through my head. And if I remembered correctly, I do think it's kind of what it looks kind of like where Vecna first arrived at the Upside Down. At least that's how I interpret it, or everyone interpreted it at the time, I think. But then, of course, it was real. No, it's another place. It's another planet. We're doing planets now on Stranger Things. But I love the build to that stuff. And because 5 starts off a little bit in the slower side. Obviously, we're just reeling from the aftermath of episode 4, and there's a little bit of like, holy crap, Will, you just did this. And a big part of the plot for Will and his team, if you will, to use a phrase, is they're going to try and reanimate one of the Demogorgons, Frankenstein style, or Frankenstein, as it's pointed out by Robin, so that he can then reconnect to the Hive and potentially try and take out Vecna just by connecting to the Hive and using his brain on him like he did the Demogorgons. And it's like, okay, obviously it's not going to work because we're too early in the season, but it's interesting that they're going there. It makes a logical sense that it's an idea they have. And an interesting detail is that it's Joyce's idea when she's the one who's been coddling him and saying, no, I need to keep him away from everything. But here, she's like, you know what? Maybe you can end all this. Maybe my son's the chosen one and he can end all this. And that's like a nice little, evolution of her character, I thought. And there's some nice banter between Will and Robin talking a bit more about the coming out, as it were, and talking about, particularly the detail that stuck out as they're setting up the Frankenstein thing, is she confesses that the first person she told that sort of let her breathe a little bit and took a weight off her shoulders was Steve. And Will's reaction to it being Steve, like, you mean our Steve Harrington? That was funny. Like, I like that reaction. I was into the stuff of that. But and this, this pays off in the Max plot. It's great when things start to coalesce, because obviously he gets into Vecna's head just when he's killing Max inside his mind. He's strangling Max, her heart monitor's going down, and he's able to to throw Vecna off and injure him. I mean, it isn't a permanent injury by any means, but it's enough to hold him down for a second for Max and Holly to get away in that point. So it feels like a pretty big deal, even though the knock-on effect is that Vecna kind of keeps his mind inside his mind, as it were, or wherever, and keeps him there. So he's kind of in a coma the next episode. And then that feeds into them also figuring out that Max is probably not really in a coma. She's actually, in there. In fact, one of obviously they find out a bunch of stuff here as well, because Will, as he's like in Vecna's mind, is saying, I see Max, I see Holly, and Lucas is like, what do you mean Max? You see Max? What's going on? So there is a nice rush of excitement as you kind of start to feel all the threads kind of come together, and very naturally all start to, like, characters become aware of like some of the other plots that are going on and start to put pieces together and all the rest of it. And I think, that was kind of like episode 5 starts off a bit slower as they're sort of thinking their plans again, and you've got Lucas and Erica both coming up with different plans to try and find where they are in the Upside Down. One's the Frankenstein plan, which to do right away, and then the other one's to go get the teacher and have him build a new sensor to try and track them. So he ends up getting more involved in the plot down the line. But I think the big plot from episode 5, though, that I really want to talk about, and it was the characters that kind of were missing for most of 4, and that's the Steve, Dustin, Nancy, Jonathan set of characters who go to the Hawkins lab inside the Upside Down. And they're fighting, they split up into 2 pairs. Jonathan and Nancy go up, Steve and Dustin go down. And there's some character stuff here, of course, like both pairs bicker about what they're going through. More Steve and Dustin bickering, and to the point where they end up having a straight up fight. Which I actually really like that sequence, because it felt very raw, and like, because Steve says some stuff about Eddie and his death being kind of like a waste, like he didn't need to go out like the way he did, and then it didn't accomplish anything, and that that pisses off Dustin, and he attacks Steve, and Steve never actually like throws a punch. Like Steve never fights back per se. He's just trying to hold him back and tell him to stop. But Dustin keeps coming at him. They go over a table, through like a door or whatever, and I like that sequence. You also have Nancy and Jonathan bickering as well, but I'll say more about them in a minute, particularly when we get to the next episode about their actual relationship, because there's a bigger scene there to talk about. But Dustin finds a room where Brenner's book or notes, his journal on the what the opening to the Upside Down is, what the Upside Down actually is, and he starts going through it, and Dustin starts freaking out, because the whole goal they've had in this building is he was thinking that there was some kind of generator of energy for that wall that surrounds the Upside Down. And he's like, hey, Vecna must have an energy source for that somewhere. He compares it to Return of the Jedi, and he's like, hey, I bet it's here. We're going to find it. But he starts freaking out when he's looking at this journal, because, this is not what he thought it was. And he's looking at all these diagrams, and he's getting really frantic. He's trying to radio the others to not interfere with this thing if they find it, because that's not what it is, and we might all die. I mean, in fact, he's pretty sure they're all going to die if they interfere with it. And meanwhile, Nancy and Jonathan have been finding doors that have been part melted, but seemingly not via heat. Although that's maybe more from episode 6, because they can touch stuff that's melting and it's not burning them or anything. It's just melting kind of on their own. But it's also kind of becoming this white sludge. And I made a promise to myself before this review not to make a really, really obvious joke one could make about a lot of white sludge covering every surface in an area. I'm not going to do it. I'm not. But they find soldiers sticking half out of walls that are dead, obviously, and it's very spooky. It's very okay, there's something weird going on here, and it's exciting in the moment, even as they're finding this stuff, because you're like, oh, this is new. This is something we've not seen before on the show. So sure enough, when they get up to the top, and it doesn't look like there's anything on the roof at first, but then they notice a sort of light shimmer. So Jonathan throws a pipe up into the sky, and it ripples to reveal kind of some sort of sphere, some sort of transparent energy sphere. And they're like, crap, this must be it. So Dustin's trying to radio them to say, don't do anything to it, don't destroy it. It's not what I thought it was. I was wrong. I was so wrong. And they don't hear that. And Nancy, even though Jonathan's like, hey, are we sure about this? And she's like, not really. And she takes the shot anyway. And we cut to black as she takes aim, or as the gunshot goes off. I can't remember the exact detail of that, but either way, that was the cliffhanger of episode 5. And it was a great cliffhanger for a start. I did not wait long. I think I went to the bathroom and I came back and I started episode 6, because there was no way I was letting that one linger if I had the choice. So Episode 6. So episode 5, like I said, starts off a bit slow, and things kind of build up and coalesce as it goes. I think episode 6 and 7 as well, to be fair, but 6 especially is basically just full of banger scenes. Like, it's like there's and surprising banger scenes in some cases. Not that I'm done talking about 5. I still need to talk about Max and Holly, but it's probably easier to go back and talk about that separately. Because the effect of this, which is this energy becomes unstable and shockwaves start coming out of it and start just spread throughout all the Upside Down, which, by the way, on a surround sound system sounded amazing. Right? It was so beefy and bassy and like the directional stuff and all that. And this is what puts Elle and her crew in danger because they're near the wall and it makes a hole in the wall. And the big reveal here, the camera backs out of that hole where the car was, and it looks like we're in space. And it turns out that the Upside Down is the wormhole, basically. It's the bridge. That's the word they use for the title of episode 7. And this is stuff that's kind of more elaborated on in episode 7, but since we're talking about it, just to kind of like put it on the table here, when Vecna was banished by Elle, right, in the backstory, he wasn't sent to the Upside Down. He was sent to this other planet. This other planet that was barren, and as the characters say in episode 7, this planet's where all the creatures come from. This is the planet where the Demogorgon, Demodogs, Mind Flayer, all that stuff comes from there. And Vecna was there, and that's where he was, and the Upside Down wasn't even a thing yet. The bridge didn't exist yet. The bridge was created when they forced Elle to try and find him, and we kind of known that the Upside Down was created then, you know, when Will disappeared, and, you know, it was in 1983 where it was created because everything matches that time period exactly. But that's what the Upside Down is. It's not another dimension like we've kind of always thought it was. It's a wormhole, and there's a planet on the other side of the wormhole. And that's something that we obviously get a good visual sense of by the time we get to the start of episode 7. And we kind of understand the locations a little bit. I loved this reveal. When that camera pulled back and we saw space, I popped for that, because this is the type of wild shit where I'm just like, oh yeah, we're going super science fiction on this now. And even though technically Dustin has a line at one point where he says, oh, we thought it was dark magic, but it's science fiction. I mean, technically, it's always been science fiction. I mean, they've always spoken about it in terms of magic because they talk about it and relate it to D&D, but it's always been somewhat science fiction. But this is like going super... And obviously, that scene with the wormhole being mentioned back in episode 2 or 3, yeah, obviously that was foreshadowing something. I thought we were foreshadowing time shenanigans, but no, this is even bigger than that in a lot of ways. So, it felt unique. What this ended up being. I really liked the visual of it. It looked gorgeous, and yeah, I got excited. I was like, oh, I'm actually into this like new layer of what the whole mystery is. And I think if I can credit this show with something, is that every time they've peeled back a little bit more of like what the Upside Down is, what the rules are, what's going on, it does kind of feel like it keeps building in a very positive way, where I very rarely went, oh, I don't like this addition to the lore, or I don't like this addition to what they've done here. It feels like they've really put some thought into it. And certainly, maybe not from season 1, but certainly from a while ago, they had like a rough idea of where they were going with these ideas, because it doesn't feel like it's betraying anything that was there before. If anything, we came out of season 4 after we had the whole Vecna reveal of like, well, did he create the creatures? Is he just controlling them? Like, did he form the Upside Down with his mind? Kind of thing. But then, of course, we had that one little wrinkle of it being tied to 1983, which wouldn't make sense because he went there before. But he didn't go there. He went to this other planet, which we're calling the Abyss, which is also a D&D related name, which Dustin coins quite happily. So, no, I loved all this reveal stuff. I thought all the melting stuff was awesome as well, where, you know, Nancy and Jonathan wake up and they've fallen into a room and the door's stuck with this melty stuff and it's filling up, and we get kind of the slow, like, we're eventually going to drown in here with this melted white goo if we don't get out. And since we're on that, I mean, I think it's worth just talking about their big scene in episode 6, which I thought was surprisingly effective. And I think it's effective. And the show's done this a couple times now, actually. Even this season, I talked about the scene with Will and Robin and how they managed to navigate the idea that he is, got a crush on Mike, but he's going to have to accept that that's maybe a no-go, but still come out of this with like a sort of healthy lesson to feel good. And they kind of did that with that conversation with Robin, and then that goes further into a later scene, of course, we're going to talk about. I think they kind of threaded a needle here with this as well that I was kind of impressed by. One, because the scene was very effective and like worked emotionally, and the music obviously added a lot to it because the music's great in the show. But Jonathan and Nancy, it's not exactly a relationship that anyone's been that into for seasons at this point, right? People kind of maybe were into it a little bit in season 1 when Steve was an asshole and Jonathan was kind of the shy loner guy, and it was playing into some tropes. But once we got to season 2 and Steve starting to be like a cool character and we all started to like him, Jonathan was kind of left floundering a little bit. And I think especially their relationship troubles in season 3 weren't exactly the best part. And I love season 3, but that's definitely not like part that I'm like super in love with necessarily. And in season 4, Jonathan, I mean, Nancy's always been kind of a cool character. I think she got a lot of hate in season 1 because of the weird, like, I don't know, the Barb movement was kind of this weird thing that that people latched onto. I've talked about that before. But, she's this capable character. She's kind of this badass. I think she's a much more interesting character on her own typically than what her relationship is with someone. And I think this sequence managed to address their relationship troubles, right? They both make confessions about stuff and about how things haven't been working. They bring up stuff they've lied about and her hating the Clash, him hating whatever, and getting, super honest about it and admitting that they've been lying to themselves, and even talking about the fact that, like, yeah, they've got this shared trauma because they can't exactly meet someone new and talk about all this crap they've been through in Hawkins with demons and monsters and whatever else, but it's also a little bit suffocating because we feel kind of tied to each other and the rest of the group in a way that maybe we want. So I think, the cringe of him having that engagement ring and worrying about how that's going to go. And I think most people probably expected a scene where he was going to try and propose. And that's not it's necessarily a bad thing, because I think most people would probably assume that it's not going to go well. He's going to propose as a means to try and fix a broken relationship, and it's going to make things worse. And the anticipation of that was a little cringy. Like, oh God, is he going to go through with this? Right? They threaded the needle here, where it comes up, he admits that he has it, he's honest about it, and he whips out the ring, but he does so in a moment of realization, talking about how, I thought this would fix things. He says, I've been walking around with this cannonball in my pocket for 2 days, and says, will you agree to not marry me? And she says, I agree to not marry you. And it's kind of them admitting that their relationship isn't working, it's not healthy, at least the way it is. I don't necessarily know if this is like a breakup per se. I don't even know if that's what they're doing here necessarily, but it's admitting that a marriage isn't going to solve it, and it's admitting that they've got stuff to work on at the very least, even if they are now done as a couple or not, right? But the beautiful imagery of this scene and kind of the metaphor they're going with here is that they think they're going to die, right? The goo's rising up, they're on the table at this point, it's almost coming over, it's very emotional, and Jonathan's the one who chooses to throw the ring away, but when he does so, there's a little clink, because it lands on solid ground, and they realize that all this melted stuff has hardened. It's stopped coming down. Whatever reaction was happening has stopped, and everything's completely good, and they're actually all going to be okay. And it's a very simple metaphor of it took them admitting everything that was wrong with the relationship and how they felt for things to be stable again, for the meltdown to stop. But both the physical meltdown stopped, but their relationship meltdown also stopped here. And that was a very good scene. So given the fact that Jonathan is probably one of my least favorite characters in the show, and the fact that, I like Nancy, her relationship with Jonathan's not something I really care about that much, I think this was a very effective scene, because it felt like they both realize why their relationship doesn't work very much, and they came out on the other end feeling they'd both learned something and become better people because of it, and that felt very nice. And speaking of payoffs to things, as Steve and Dustin are trying to get up to help them, not knowing what situation they're even in, but knowing that they're probably in trouble because all this stuff's happened to the building, Steve's about to try and follow a big gap of melted stairs with a ladder, and it doesn't look very stable, but he's going to try it anyway. And Dustin and him have been fighting, and Dustin pulls him back and says, no, and I can't remember the exact phrasing, but it's something to the effect of, I can't lose you. I can't go through this again. I can't lose you. And he gets really emotional. It's a really good moment, actually, from a performance perspective. And Steve realizes how scared Dustin is of losing him. And it's, this, a lot of this has come from a place of fear, and there's this sort of emotional hug that happens where Steve's kind of reassuring them that he's, that he's not going, or he's going to be okay or whatever. It's a really good moment. And these are pretty close together, relatively speaking, in the episode. So it felt like this episode 6 was really hitting a lot of emotional beats between characters. Some where I could have predicted they were going to hit me hard, and then some like Jonathan and Nancy where I was actually kind of impressed they made me care as much as they did in the moment, because it felt like their confessions were almost meta in a weird way of hey, yeah, this relationship's not working, and we're learning from it. I'm not saying the writers are saying they've learned from it necessarily, but they've definitely thought about how to tackle it in a way where it feels like the characters are growing up from it, as opposed to just going to the most obvious conclusion or dramatic sort of turning the story they could, right? If this was a rom-com, this is not how this would play out. Would be a very different story in that case. And she also mentions in the scene she doesn't want what Steve wants. So honestly, the most interesting outcome from this quote-unquote love triangle would be that she doesn't end up with either of them, and they all realize they're all better for other people. They're not suited together, right? Even though there's this weird jealousy kind of angle between the two guys, at least up until this point. Obviously, when they do break in the room and get them out, there's a bit more of a mutual kind of respect kind of formed there a little bit. There's actually a really sweet moment when they do break them out of the room, and Dustin just goes up and hugs Nancy really tight, and it's a very sweet moment, and he pulls back and then he's like, wait, was that inappropriate? Should I not have done that? It felt like the right and then she's like, no, it's okay. And it's sweet for a couple of reasons. One, because we know that he's scared of losing people that he cares about, and that would still include Nancy. But also, it reminds me back to the end of season 2, where she did that really sweet thing of dancing with him at his school dance when none of the other girls would, and that being one of her big likable moments early on. Well, early-ish on in the show. I mean, end of season 2 is not exactly at the start anymore, but you know what I mean, relative. So, yeah, that was really nice making me think of that again, and thinking of this weird friendship between these two characters that otherwise, wouldn't really share that much together in common. So, dug that. So to rewind a little bit and go into the main stuff with Max and Holly. Obviously, it's exciting once they, the characters on the outside start to understand maybe Max is inside the same place Holly is, and all that. But you also, the fact that Vecna eventually looks through Will's mind to find out where Max is, because this idea that, he even threatens Holly at one point, hey, I'll hurt Max. So there's more than one way to hurt Max. And obviously, I think most people will get that he's talking about hurting her physical body on the outside. I don't think Holly necessarily understands that's what he's saying, but that's what I think we're all going to take from it. And that becomes a threat, obviously, towards the end of episode 6. But even in episode 5, I liked a lot of the exploring of the memories was decent enough. It recapped a couple of things from earlier in the season. You see a couple of things from a different perspective. I guess the standout one that I would bring up is Holly seeing the moment she was taken from the house again, and feeling bad that she didn't try and help her mother in any way, feeling like she was a coward, even though she's 10 and this thing's a monster, and what chance would she have had if she tried to help fight? But she still feels guilty, and she still feels seeing what happened to her mother again, and maybe not even remembering it initially because of the weird mind stuff with Vecna. It was probably fuzzy how she got here. So that stuff obviously sets up some character things for her. But we also have a little bit more Derek, And I did love the moment where they're like, because he goes out and finds them, because Holly obviously went back to the house, and that was like a scary thing for her because she had to pretend that everything was okay. But all the kids are there now, and she's having to pretend to be okay with everything as Vecna's telling them what they're going to be doing, and he's phrasing this, and this. We're going to save the world. There's monsters and stuff, but we're going to put a stop to it. We're going to bring worlds together, and we're going to make things better. But Derek also knows this is bullshit because he has knowledge from the others. And one, I really liked when Derek caught Holly sneaking out to talk to Max. One, because when he started bringing up like other characters, like Mike and so on, and Max is like, wait, how do you know those characters? And then Holly calling him a dipshit, and he's like, no, I'm Delightful Derek now. But then when they come up with their plan, where they need someone to distract Vecna so they can try and run away, it's like, hey, no, we don't need Delightful Derek. We need Derek the dipshit to make a distraction. And the little smirk that comes on his face as he's like, oh yeah, now I get to be bad. I get to be dipshit Derek for a good cause. And it's like, oh, this is my calling. This is my time. This is my chance. But yeah, there's a lot of them going through the flashbacks, trying to find the exit, finding that sort of craggy rock with all the red skies and stuff. And they're almost there. At one point. Also, shout out to Holly. Another point in her favor as being a great character is she's already watching Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors. We see that in one of her memories. She was watching that in Halloween. I fully approve. Good taste. Just like Max with Halloween, we've got Elm Street 3 for Holly. So, we get the big moment where she's getting strangled by Vecna, and Will is able to kind of break it away for a little bit. They retreat to the cave. And there's a whole thing where they're looking through the telescope, but the little hole that's on the cap ends up being a really important plot point because it lines up with the cave, kind of, I'll call it the window, the opening. And she's basically like, if we stand in a certain point in the desert, like maybe we'll find whatever the quote-unquote treasure is. And it ends up in an opening to a cave system where they go down the ladder. Now, I'm rushing through a lot of the search for this, obviously. It took up a bit of screen time. But it's a memory that's down here. And the memory is Vecna as a child finding what seems to be a scientist clutching a case, holding a gun, and actually shooting child Henry in the hand. And then we don't see a little bit of it, and then we see a little bit more where young Henry beats him to death with a rock. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. I'm kind of excited to see where we find out more of this. And I think we will find out more because when Will talks about his fears being used against him, and then Max does tell Will, hey, there was a memory in here that he's scared of because he wouldn't go in there. I think we are going to explore what Vecna's scared of. I think we're going to see what this is. And it seems like it might be tied to the origin, which makes me think, what's in that case? Because I think that was a question, was did he get a natural ability? Was he just born with this? Or is there something in that case? And the scientist is freaking out because of what he's been working on that's made him very paranoid? Or is Henry already dangerous and he knows he's dangerous and that's why he's scared? It feels like it's more probably the former, but it's interesting either way. I kind of wanted them to keep watching the memory to find out a bit more. But we leave just as he's opening the case because it turns out there is an exit through some rocks, some rubble to where the exits are, where the portals appear when she hears Kate Bush. And I got a couple of kicks out of this actually, because when Holly's like, I don't have Kate Bush, I don't even know who Kate Bush is. And then she's like, yeah, turns out I don't even know if it's the music that's helping me, it may just be Lucas. And then Holly's like, I don't have a boyfriend either. I was getting some chuckles out of that. The actress who plays Holly's quite good actually, really good kid actor. But this is actually another emotional scene. It doesn't land maybe as much as the other ones because it's not been built up quite as much, but it's still a very good sequence of Max basically saying, hey, you can't come through the same portal as me. That's to my body. That's where I am. You have to open your own portal, so you have to connect with the real world. And I was glad that Max had this realization, because it felt like she thought of it quite late. But I was thinking throughout the episode that, well, even if going through the same portal technically works, which I'm not sure why it would, and clearly it doesn't, they get their own portals, but surely she would wake up in her body, and her body is not in a normal place, right? The body's with all the other kids, and so, at the time thinking it was the Upside Down, obviously we find out later it's in the other planet, but she's like, yeah, you're going to have to like get your own portal. And she gives her like a whole pep talk and talking about how she's brave because she went into the woods. She trusted Max, even though, Vecna's trying to convince her that Max is like an imposter, try to trick her or whatever. Gives her a whole pep talk, and she's like, yo, you are Holly the heroic, you are, blah, blah, blah. And it's all very sweet. It plays back, and she even says, it's not really about the little figure that you were given. She mentions that Mike gave it to her. And it's actually one of my favorite running little things between them, actually, is when Max keeps like saying, you reminded me of your brother, or you definitely are your brother. Those moments were quite good. It was nice her recognizing some of Mike's character traits in his little sister. But sure enough, a portal opens, so we get both of them running towards the portals at the end of the episode. But as this is all happening, just to make it really tense and make it feel like there's a bunch of things coalescing, we have Robin and Lucas at the hospital because they're preparing and hoping that Max is going to wake up. He's got the music playing. Robin, though, gets pulled aside by her girlfriend, who's mad at her for ditching on her, but also, like, people notice she stole meds to knock out that family, so they're kind of looking for her, and Robin, off camera, explains everything, right? And I can just imagine, I almost want a deleted scene. I get why it's not in the episode. It would be a terrible pacing decision to have a character recount everything in the lore to a new person, but part of me does want to see it separately, just to see the crazy way that Robin would rush through and phrase it all, because you can imagine her just like a machine gun, just words vomiting out of her, because that's who she is. But she doesn't believe her. She says, oh, you stole those meds, you're clearly a drug addict, you need help. And she doesn't believe a word of it. And I'm like, okay, we're building up to her seeing a Demogorgon, and it's going to be delightful. It's going to be delightful. What's interesting, though, is this is all going down, and the lights start to flicker, and they realize that, they're coming for Max, so there's danger ahead. We cut to Karen, who sees the lights flicker as well, and she's getting like PTSD because she remembers the lights flickering from episode 2. So she gets up, and she ends up being the savior, towards the end of the episode, or maybe it's the start of episode 7. I think it must be the start of episode 7. But she does the whole thing with the oxygen tank to kill the demidogs. Although, not to discount any other badassery here, Lucas gets a really cool little moment when they're trying to go down the elevator to the basement, and the demidog comes up to the door, and Lucas just straight up kicks it in the face, and then the door's shut. Obviously, he wouldn't have been able to hold it off for much longer, but he got one good kick in, and it felt kind of badass for him. So that was nice. So there's this, dual thing happening of the emotional stuff with Max and Holly, but then in the real world, you've got like several people trying to keep Max's body safe. And that's just good storytelling, because it gives you this ticking time clock where the fuse is running at both ends, and you're hoping they're going to make it. And honestly, when they were both running towards the portals at the end of episode 6, before it cut to black, I really thought Vecna was going to pop out and grab one of them. I wasn't sure which one, but I thought one of them was probably going to get grabbed. It's like, okay, one of them gets out, but one of them doesn't. And I guess in a long form way, that was still kind of true. It just happened a little bit later with Holly. She got grabbed, a little bit into episode 7, as opposed to as she was running to the portal. She did get to wake up. And I loved Max having the forethought to say, hey, if you wake up, you're probably in the Upside Down. But it's just like Hawkins, so go to your house in the Upside Down so we know where to find you. Now, obviously this doesn't actually end up being that important in the long run because of the events that play out, but I still love that she said it because it made complete sense. It was somewhere she would know to go, and it would give everyone else a place to go find her. Now, obviously the events play out the way they do, it doesn't matter, but it still made sense for the character to go through that thought process and make that suggestion. It was a good idea. So, that's good stuff. And then obviously all the stuff of Max waking up at the start of the episode is emotional, and Lucas talking to her, and everyone kind of being happy. Although Karen's obviously very concerned about where Holly is. She seems to have told them a lot about Holly between scenes, as opposed to us hearing it. It would have been nice to see the reaction of like her saying some of the stuff about Holly, perhaps in front of both Mike and Karen. But it was nice, though, Mike seeing his mum be a badass, that was, or at least finding out anyway soon after the fact, and promising her to bring the Holly back, because she wants to go, and like both the girlfriend nurse and is like, hey, you can't leave. You might, like, you're in a serious condition still. You can't just leave the hospital. And Mike has to tell her, no, you're right. You need to stay here and get better. But I love that there's a short version of making her like trust that they'll achieve getting the sister back is simply just, hey, remember when Will disappeared? He disappeared just like this. It was this team that got him back. We're going to get Holly back. I like that. One, it brings us full circle again, final season, calling back to the start, but also just purely because it's like, yeah, it's true. Like that's your resume here for saving people who have been kidnapped by Vecna into the Upside Down, or in this case, the other planet, which is a new wrinkle, to be fair, and a lot to a lot more problem solving to be had with that. But really, really dug like everything. Like the end of episode 6 into the start of 7 is also just pretty much nothing but phenomenal stuff. There was really very little to be upset or mad about. I'm sure nitpickers are going to be like, well, they mentioned Maxie's eyes like can't see very well because she's not opened them in a while, and her muscles obviously haven't been used in a while. And they do have her in a wheelchair for the rest of the episode, and she can't really lift her arms very well. For me, that's enough. I don't care if that's not technically accurate enough, right? If someone's going to come in and say, well, it would actually be more like this, I'm not really that fussed. I don't care. Because I will say there is definitely one of the burdens of the internet actually is seeing all kinds of weird takes and weird backlashes to anything that are positive. And don't get me wrong, sometimes I don't like something that's positive, and I'll try and justify it when I think I do not like something that's popular or whatever. But it does feel like people do have their pitchforks out sometimes for certain things, and it does baffle me some of the complaints I see and critiques of certain moments. I mean, I haven't really looked much, obviously. I just finished watching these episodes, but just immediately I saw something related to like Will, where someone, and we're not even talked about this yet, but I saw someone say that they felt like Will has to confess specifically to Mike about having a crush on him by the end of the show. And I don't really think that's true. I feel like everything he needed to confess to the others is there, because it's not really important to Mike that Will had a crush on him. Like, that was just about Mike, or about Will working out his own feelings. That was something Will had to go over. Well, there's no reason to burden Mike with that necessarily. I mean, what's he going to say in return? Really, I don't feel like he needs that. Like the whole. So to get into this, right, there's a big scene after they've formed a lot of their plans for what's going to be the finale of the show, right? Because they basically end the episode getting into the Upside Down for all the main characters. But Will has a whole moment where he's had a couple of one-on-ones with his mum by this point, and feeling like he's weak, feeling like he's not strong enough. But it all comes to a head when they're getting ready to leave for the big plan, right? And we'll talk about what the big plan is. But the big emotional scene of episode 7 is Will coming out to everyone. And I actually really liked the plot reasons for this. And again, this is something I think I've seen people nitpick a little bit, is they don't understand why he had to come out to everyone. But I think the show makes it perfectly clear why he has to come out to everyone. In the same way that they sort of tied him sort of like coming to acceptance of himself for the end of episode 4, he specifically says that the reason why Vecna was able to overpower his mind is because Vecna looks for fears. He looks for things that are secret that he can exploit and make people like so crippled by fear that they'll just like all his defenses go down, or however you want to phrase it, and he's able to use them like a puppet, right? And Will feels used. Will feels used again. That, he keeps hearing that "you'll be my puppet one more time" line over and over in his head. He specifically says that he thought he'd gotten over his fears, but Vecna found a new fear. And he's just talking to Joyce at this point, but he's realizing that he really kind of has to, like, and I think it's clear what he's saying here. He's saying that he's basically taking power away from Vecna. That, okay, it's too risky for me to go in with the mission and get close to the hive mind because I might be overpowered again. But he's realizing that the way he was overpowered was like his fears being exploited. But he can take that power away from Vecna by giving those fears up. And how does he overcome the fear? Because the one fear that he's clearly got is telling everyone that he's gay. So he's about to tell Joyce, but then Mike walks in and accidentally interrupts it, and Will's like, you know what, actually, Mike, you should hear this too. Everyone should. So we get a scene where they all gather in a circle for Will to make his announcement. Point number one, I love that Jonathan, seconds into this, knows what this is going to be. Because as much as I say Jonathan's one of the lesser favorite characters, they did make it clear in season 4 that he kind of knows about his brother, right? He's figured it out, right? And that's something that happens sometimes with close people to someone who's not come out yet, is that they kind of already have figured it out. So you can tell in his face that he knows where this is going, and he's like, proud of his brother. And that's sweet immediately. So Will starts basically saying, I am different from everyone else. I mean, I'm like you in most ways, and he lists like a bunch of stuff: playing D&D, drinking Coke with Pop Rocks in it, and all the other shitty things they do as kids. They're not shit, you know what I mean? Like, just, all the random bullshit they like to do as kids, the movies they like to watch, whatever. But he starts getting faster. He starts getting faster as he's talking. He's trying to build up the courage to just say it, and he eventually says, "I don't like girls." And then he sort of realizes how that sounds. He's like, well, actually, I do like girls, but just not like you guys do. Which I thought was... I love that he stumbled over a little bit. I love that it didn't come out in the most neat way possible. I love that he didn't just stand up and say like a full, clear sentence, proudly declaring that he's gay. I like that it was clunky. I like that he was tripping over his words, and he was getting a little bit agitated as he was actually getting to say it. And it's cutting around all the reactions of everyone sort of, watching and just taking in what he's saying. No one, and obviously Robin's also knowing where this is going, and she's kind of reacting appropriately as well. But he goes straight into like why he's saying this, which is the fears. Vecna showed him the future, but not really the future, just the fears that he has about the future. Fears that some of you will be okay with this, some of you won't be, but we'll grow apart, and I'll lose these friendships, and we'll all grow more distant, and I'll be alone, or I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but this idea that everything will change because of this announcement, and it'll start a slow ripple that will basically lead them all adrift. So we get this declaration from everyone one by one, starting with Joyce, Jonathan, and then his close friends. Mike's in there in one of the first few, all saying, "You're not losing me." And even Elle stands up and says, "You're not losing me," which to me already felt like she was saying, "Oh, I'm not going with Callie's whole plan to do the sacrifice thing and not come back," even though Callie's still giving her the eye by the end of the episode. But I feel like this scene, if nothing else, of him saying, no, like, yes, lots of bad things can happen, but fearing them and just living in the fear of it all means that the good things definitely will not happen, right? So the whole dream of going and living somewhere with a waterfall, as much as that is just a sort of a pie in the sky kind of dream at this point, it'll definitely never happen if you just decide it's impossible. I think this feels like not only a good scene for Will, but if we're buying into this plot with Elle, that at the very least this is a very good example to her of someone else overcoming their fear, even in the insurmountable odds perhaps that are presented in front of them, and doing this. And there's a big group hug, and particularly like the whole idea of Max. She can't physically go and hug him, so she has to ask him to come and hug her, and that was a sweet moment as well. I thought this was very well handled. I think the fact that they started teasing this in season 3, it was early season 3, when it had an argument with Mike about them wanting to spend time with girls, and there was the first kind of breadcrumb, I think, really, at least for most people, that this is the path that we're going down, and they made it more overt in season 4. But I think because we have been building this for 2 seasons, which in the timeline of the real world has been like 5 or 6 years at this point, this scene landed a lot more than I think it would have otherwise. I think it felt a bit more powerful. It felt a bit more like, yeah, this has been weighing on the characters, waiting for this to come out. And, no one reacts poorly. No one acts weirded out by it or gives him the negative reaction. He said what he needed to say, and he was then confronted with the fact that every single person in that room wanted to support him. It was a very sweet scene, right? And obviously, like, if you're looking for, like, raw realism, yeah, in a realistic sense, there probably would be, I mean, maybe depending on where you live, there probably would be some people who would be a bit more weirded out, if not outright bigoted towards it. But that's not the characters we've built up in this show. We've built up a good oddball family of characters who have come together, and they're very likable, so we're not going to turn around and make them all a bunch of shitheads in the second last episode of the show. So, yeah, very powerful scene. I mean, this scene, the Dustin and Steve scene from episode 6, the Nancy Jonathan scene from episode 6, Max Holly at the end of 5, all the stuff with Max waking up, and the sad Moby song started playing again for that, which, you know, gets me every time they play that. When it's cold, I like to die is the name of the song. It's a very good song, and they've been going back to that ever since season 1. Like, all that stuff, I think was really effective. And like, for any faults about, you know, a little bit of exposition at times, and to be fair, I actually quite like the scene where Dustin explains to them what's going on, right? I enjoy these scenes where Dustin or some of the other main characters have figured things out and are starting to, like, because that's always been a part of the show. Back to season 1 was the, hey, this is the upside down, we're going to flip the game board over, right? That's been a fundamental part of the show since the start. So I think if you're complaining about them doing these kinds of scenes now, it feels a bit weird to me, because I'm like, this is what it's always been. I don't know, it's a little bit strange to me. But he goes through a lot of what I've already talked about it being a bridge, about the two worlds, you know, one being Earth, one being the Abyss. And they're like, so... And obviously the one thing actually I've not mentioned yet is the start of episode 7, Holly waking up, which leads into this discussion as well. Is Holly... And bless her, because even though she ultimately gets nabbed again and taken back, like, I love that she looks like a little badass in her own right, just because she's able to pull the weird flesh hose out of her mouth. That sounds terrible. You know what I'm talking about, though, the connecting thing for the mind meld. And she, like, gets out of the cocoon and she goes running out into this alien planet and is running towards it. And Vecna does wake up, because he's hanging there connected with all these flesh cables himself, and he comes all the way out to her, and she, like, sees, like, a crack in the ground with the red underneath it, and realizes, oh, it's an opening just like the one I went through before. So she decides to dive into it, and she starts climbing through it. And this actually was great, because it was like, when she woke up and she's running through this place and it didn't look the upside down, I'm like, oh god, how are they going to ever find her? How are they going to ever find where this place is? How is this going to be achieved? When she goes through this gateway, right, you realize that this is a gateway to the upside down from this other planet. So she comes out on the top of the upside down and starts falling through the sky. Which, obviously, I'm like, how's she not going to die? And, you know, like, even Nancy and that hear the scream coming from up above, and they go out and see her falling down, and they're panicking. We actually cut away and don't see all of this up front. Some of it we sort of wait, and we wait until the characters, like, find where the upside down characters are. In the real world, they all go in to retrieve them, so everyone gets reunited by that point. And, like, then they tell the story, and we see, and this was okay, this didn't feel like bad exposition, this felt like, no, we're going to pick up where we left off earlier, and we're going to see what Nancy and the others saw with Holly falling through the sky. And what we see is that when she gets to a certain point, she just stops, and then gets dragged back up. Like, Vecna, with his mental powers, has just pulled her back, which inherently is maybe a slightly good thing in this case, because she probably definitely would have been dead if he didn't stop her from falling. Right, there was no way for her to stop falling. Right, so that's probably a good thing in that sense. But this is why there's no going to look for her at the house, because they've already seen her. They know she's been pulled somewhere else, and they don't know what it is. But luckily, Dustin's been looking at the books and stuff and the journal, and he comes out and he explains it all to them. So the kids are being kept up there, and this is kind of like the status quo going into the finale. And they're trying to think of some different plans. Hopper wants to try and fly a helicopter up there, which that feels like a stupid idea. Like, how's that going to go through the ground, which is a point they make. And it ends up being Steve who comes up with the idea of the beanstalk, is which to wait until Vecna's started merging the worlds, because that's his goal. He wants to bring the two worlds together, create a new singular world, probably killing and replacing a lot of what's already on Earth, I would assume. But wait until it gets close so that the bridge is much, 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 much smaller. It's not as tall. And the idea is that when it's close enough, the radio tower, right, the huge radio tower outside the radio station, will eventually be touching either the other radio. No, there wouldn't be another radio tower in the sky. No, but it'll be tall enough to reach the other planet, right? The bridge will be much shorter, but the risky part is they have to wait until they're already starting to merge. So they're going to have this, it's setting up a really tense finale because they're going to have a really short window of time before it's too late to stop the merger. And they also have the idea, of course, to blow up the bridge blow up the energy, right? Which obviously one little gunshot made a big shockwave that made a hole into space. There was a lot of debris. The idea being that if we actually just blow that up with an actual huge explosion, it will sever the connection, the upside down, the bridge will be gone, and there'll never be another way for any of the Demogorgons or anything else to come through and come after anyone ever again. It will be done. It'll be completely severed. And it makes sense we're talking about this because it's the end game of the show. So yeah, I mean, I like when they have a plan. I like when they've got stuff they have to do to make it work. I like Will stepping in saying, hey, maybe you're strong enough to fight Vecna on your own, but if he gets into the flesh world, someone needs to fight him here too. So it feels like, it needs to be Will and Elle going after him, because one probably has to fight him in the mind and one has to fight him out in the real world. It makes more sense that Will would be the one get into the mind, although it sounds like it's the other way around, actually, just from everything they say. But either way, it does make sense that they would both need to be there to cover both sides of the equation. And Max is going to mentally help move through Vecna's mind. She's going to connect with Elle and whatever. She can't physically go there, of course, they mention. Erica and the teacher help them break into the military base to go into the Upside Down, so there's a little mini action sequence at the end as they're doing that. But it sounds like they're staying back, so I don't know how much of them we're going to see in the final episode. I mean, maybe they'll have a little something to do. But to go back to Holly for a second, the poor girl gets dragged back, right? Gets all reconnected, and when she wakes up, Vecna has convinced all the children with reverse psychology that they need to brainwash Holly into thinking that this Max character was a monster trying to trick her, and that they have to help Vecna save the world. So when she wakes up, they're all just a little cult trying to convince her this is some sort of intervention, and Holly's freaking out, and she's like, hey, dipshit Derek, this is real stuff. And then he remembers the horrible visions that Vecna showed of his family being killed, and he just sort of lies and says, nope, they're right, this Max was a fake person, it was a trick. So I suspect Derek's going to maybe have a heroic moment in the finale, helping Holly perhaps to kind of make up for this little moment of fear that he had. But then she gets beat up. The kids tackle her and strangle her until her necklace breaks, and the little Holly the heroic goes flying. The poor girl has got blood on her head at the end of the episode when Vecna starts his his mind meld that's going to merge the two worlds together. He needs kids to amplify his powers or something. So yeah, that's all the plot stuff. But yeah, Holly goes through the ringer, right? She gets out with Max, kinda, but on her own. She has to try and get out on her own. She's willing to run. She's willing to go to this portal, and then almost dies, falling to her death, and then is attacked by a gang of children who have all been brainwashed by Vecna. It's dire stuff. And I think what's so good about that, actually, is that so much of the season's goal, obviously they're going to save all the kids, right? It's not just Holly they're going to come after now, because they've got 12 to save. But by making Holly such a strong character, who for the most part had some pretty compelling plots. I do think when Max was telling her the backstory stuff in 4, that was a little bit of a grind because it was just really dodgy or clunky exposition. But by making her a very likable, strong character in her own right, who's kind of coming into her own and finding moments of bravery and feeling like a proactive character who we're rooting for. It makes us care more about the others coming to save her, but it also means that we kind of like are rooting for her to like, bridge the gap, as it were. And that, yeah, they'll save her, but she's probably going to do a couple of heroic things herself to make that a possibility from her end, because she's becoming she's been a main character this season on her own right, and she's so likable that we actually care about them coming to save her. In fact, I would say we care much more about Holly being saved by the rest of the crew than we ever did about Will in season 1, which wasn't really a problem in season 1, right? It was all about everyone else trying to find the MacGuffin child. That's all he was, a MacGuffin. But Holly's not just a MacGuffin. Holly's an actual character, and we've got a character from that age group now to sort of represent the rest of the kids. But it also means that we have someone that we care for on a more personal level. So the stakes feel high, even outside of the he's trying to, merge two worlds that'll destroy everything stuff that's going on. So that stuff is just really good. And like I said, this show is often at its best when lots of plots are coalescing and characters are starting to click with things from other plot lines in a way that feels very natural. And it mostly is very, very good at that, with how things come back together again. And obviously there's lots of little moments, like the teacher seeing like Elle use her powers and being like in awe of it, or various little bits like that. Murray calling him Schnookums the whole time because they find him, like, he wakes up when the librarian from the school's his girlfriend apparently, and he's cracking jokes about that, and that was amusing, throughout the episode. Just lots of the those humor or like very human character moments sprinkled throughout, just making like everyone feel pretty likable and whatever. Like I said, I think my biggest critique of this trio of episodes is maybe this little direction they've got with Callie, where she's trying to convince the Elle to do what she's doing. The last episode, because I just like, will every character make it? Probably not. And there's very few that I would be okay to lose in a lot of ways. So we've got a lot of characters, we've got a lot of people get into this finale, and it's a credit that in a cast of like 18 people or whatever it is, like most of them are likable to extremely likable, and it's it's hard to pull that off in a lot of ways. And even like minor characters have had great moments this season, like Karen, their mother, like her having some badass moments across a couple of episodes now, but having to trust their kids to go and save the day. That's a really nice little detail that I like quite a bit. And I think the pacing is usually very good in Stranger Things, and I think that's mostly been true this season as well. Again, barring maybe a little bit in episode 4, where I did have some complaints about pacing there. But I did say 5 started off a bit slower, but that's not even really a complaint per se. It's more just like we kind of need to breathe a little bit before things start to build back up and get exciting again. And all of the payoffs to everything in 6 and 7 were all, I think, very satisfying for me. Some surprisingly so, and I really appreciate that. The music's still very on point. There's several moments of good music. Old themes coming back and just like really hitting the emotional beats throughout the episodes. So, going into the finale, obviously they've got their plan to take care of everything. Obviously there'll be wrinkles. We know the finale is about 2 hours and 6 minutes long, which is actually shorter than the season 4 finale, which is almost a little disappointing. I was hoping for a 3-hour epic. I guess just because I'm hoping for more show just before it's over, because I always feel that way in a final season. But I'm sure they've they've got everything they need. I do wonder like how much of the episode will be the plan and how much of it will be epilogue type stuff, because I feel like there has to be at least 10 minutes at the end of like saying goodbye to all the characters, possibly even more than that. I wouldn't be surprised if the main like threat is dealt with by the 90-minute mark, and then we get 30 minutes of like wrap up and like goodbyes and emotional moments, and maybe a funeral or two if anyone died, which is very possible at this point. Which actually, one of the things that I've barely mentioned in these this review so far, and I think it is a little telling. And it's not even a complaint per se, because I don't really want them to be focused on any more than they have been. But the military side of this has been very kind of like in the background these 3 episodes, where there's a couple of scenes with Linda Hamilton talking to the grunt and saying we need the girl, blah blah blah. But it's you know, that's kind of it for the most part, really. Obviously we see the military try and fight the truck of the characters at the end. But obviously Elle's got her powers. You got Nancy with the machine gun up top. Like, they get through relatively easily. And I'm okay with that, because at this point, you know, like, this is not the main part of the story. This is just like, they have to get in. At this point, there's bigger fish to fry in dealing with the military. But obviously, they've introduced these military characters. They've introduced Linda Hamilton. They're going to be a factor in this final episode. They're probably going to be a wrench in the plan when things are maybe going well, but the military are coming at them from the other side whilst they're trying to deal with Vecna and all that stuff on the front end. So I'm sure they will make things more difficult for the characters in the finale. I will say that it doesn't really feel like they're by any means the focus of what's going on anymore, and haven't for almost the entirety, I'd say, of these 3 episodes. They feel kind of like their purpose has mostly been served at this point. Like, there wasn't that much more to Linda Hamilton's character, really, than what there already was in the first 4, which probably means there's not a ton to her character in general. I don't see them really adding a whole lot of good stuff with her in the finale. I could be wrong. Maybe they'll surprise me. It's always possible they will. It feels like that's just there to be an extra threat in the last episode to make things tougher and potentially more exciting, because there's going to be like multiple battles happening in multiple fronts, and, you know, things coalescing as they love to do on this show. But yeah, I realized that I hadn't really mentioned them, and, you know, thinking about it, there's one scene where they're talking to the guy that was burned, saying like how powerful Vecna was, and you know, Linda Hamilton says at one point, "Oh, just think if we had these things as soldiers, they'd be over there killing Soviets instead of Americans, blah blah." But yeah, it's not really anything. That's not the exciting stuff. All the stuff with like what the Upside Down actually is, expanding that lore out, some of those visuals we get with that's the exciting stuff from like a plot perspective. And then the character stuff is just like firing mostly on all cylinders for most of the characters. Like, Robin has that dumb joke at one point where they're making fun of Hopper's plan of using a helicopter to get through to the Alpha, or the Abyss, the Abyss. And there's someone says something about, the hole's too small, you won't be able to get it in. And Robin says, "That's never stopped you though, Steve, has it?" And it's like this weird thing where she's like being a wingman for Steve and giving him like a I haven't been a wingman, but just, I don't know, like joking about his prowess. I don't know. It made me laugh though, and everyone else was just like, "Really, Robin? We're making that joke right now." But no, I got a good chuckle out of that. But, you know, there's lots of little lines like that. There's lots of little moments like that are really well served. There's one moment, actually, I think it's in episode 5, right after the fight between Dustin and Steve, where Dustin's like on the floor, kind of like half crying, and Steve walks off frustrated, and he's like, "I'm done with this," and he goes away, and Dustin says something, but then he sort of pauses, and he goes to say the word fake. He says, "You fake asshole," is what he says. But the way he paused and the way you could tell he was getting ready to start with an F, I really thought he was about to drop an F-bomb. I thought they were going to do an emotional moment where he says "F you" to Steve. Now, they didn't, but it generally sounded like he was about to, and then he said "fake asshole." So it's, you know, it's whatever. The point's across, but there was just a little moment there for a second where I thought they were going into something. Obviously, I'm excited for the finale. I'm excited to see how they wrap all this up. I'll be curious to see, you know, we've had so many good moments between these characters already. Most of them have had some really good stuff in this season. I would be fascinated, though, to see if even like the characters who I don't think have as interesting stories this time, if they get like cool payoffs still, because they've kind of surprised me with the Jonathan and Nancy scene, honestly. So I could see like Hopper and Elle having a really good scene next episode, even though their like struggles not really been the most compelling part of the season thus far. But the good thing about having so many characters, though, is that if you've got enough of them clicking, you've got enough plots that are fun, exciting, or interesting going on at once, you tend to like be able to like, overlook like one weaker element or you know, whatever it may be. So generally having a really good time. I don't know if it's as tight as season 4. Obviously, we still have the finale to go. And there's definitely some special feelings with it being a final season and some like side characters getting a bit more time to shine or be in on what's going on and seeing what's, you know, we've had the teacher, we've had the Wheelers. I don't know who else could see like the truth of what's been going on in Hawkins, but maybe there'll be someone else that I've not thought of. But that's my thoughts on this portion of Stranger Things. I'm sure there's probably something I would have wanted to talk about that I've forgotten. Yeah, I care about the stakes. I primarily care saving the kids, particularly Holly, especially since she's having an even worse time of it now and she's being kind of punished for being the hero. It'll be really nice to see her kind of help save the day, but get saved in the process. Like all that should be really satisfying, and I'm sure we'll get the nice big showdown that we're hoping for. The Callie stuff just feels a little bit forced to me, as a way of trying to force this extra element for Elle's character to get at the finale. It feels a little bit unelegant, I guess. But anyway, that is my thoughts. Let me know what you thought of these 3 episodes in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that stuff helps out a bunch if you can. And of course, you can support everything over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV or via YouTube membership. Any help is greatly appreciated. And thanks to everyone who already does. That is me. Thank you for joining me. I will see you guys next time, somewhere around New Year's, for the final episode of Stranger Things. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?